morning, everybody. Welcome to Indian Echo Caverns. My name is Michael. I am going to be your guide as we explore the world down below. Before we go down to the caverns, though, there are a couple of rules we ask you to follow while you're inside. First, please do not run or jump while you're inside our caverns. That way everybody stays on their feet. Nobody goes home with skinned up knees or elbows. Just as important as that, please be very mindful of where your heads are going to end up. There are a number of places inside the caverns where the ceiling is this high above the floor. This is not an exaggeration. This is fairly accurate, and I assure you the rocks are extremely hard. It is not a headache you want to take home with you today. Please, very careful with your head. While you're inside, we ask that you do not eat anything, do not drink anything, do not chew gum or use tobacco products or vapes. That way the crumbs, spills, residues, and wrappers are all going to stay outside of the cavern. We'll leave the caverns as clean as we find them. Please do not take backpacks or large bags into the caverns with you. If you're taking a small bag, please carry it on the front of your person so that as you turn, you don't accidentally knock over a rock formation. The most important rule inside our caverns today is just like every day. Please do not touch the rock formations. See, our formations continue to grow. They're growing because water is dripping from the ceiling or down onto the floor. As it's doing that, the minerals dissolved in that water are sticking to the rock formation. If you touch the formations, the natural oils when your fingers gets on them makes it impossible for the minerals to stick there. You'll stunt their growth by maybe as little as a couple hundred years, or maybe a couple of thousand years, or maybe permanently. And that's why we ask you politely but insistently, do not touch the rock formations. Has anybody been to caverns before? Not just here, but anywhere? A couple of us, actually. One thing you guys might remember from previous adventures, it can be really tricky to figure out what direction you're heading while you're underneath the ground. I like to give you a couple of reference points here on the surface so I can help you with that. One of the things we'll pass directly underneath while we're down in the cavern is the flagpole on the far side of the goat pen over there. We're also going to pass directly underneath the closest tree in the middle of the parking lot to us. We'll spend a little time underneath the building that's on the far side of those pine trees. That building is called the Brown House. It turns out they built that directly above the largest chamber of the cavern, the Indian Ballroom. I realize you can't see the Brown House from here. I will point it out to you as we go down the path towards the top of the steps. If you want to take photographs inside the caverns today, take as many as you would like. It is okay to use a flash inside. It is also okay to take videos. I do ask only one thing about photographs and videos. Please take your photographs only while we're standing still. That way we're going to stay together as a group, but more importantly, that way you're not going to be looking through that camera and miss a thing that hit you in the forehead. All right, does anybody have any questions before we go down? All right then, who's ready for an adventure?
Yeah.
Wow, is it Monday? Who's ready for an adventure? That's better, let's go! If you take just a brief moment, look underneath the pine trees. The gray colored building you see over there is the Brown House. Again, it was built directly over the biggest room of the caverns, the Indian Ballroom. At some point, we're going to leave that room and explore the eastern canyons. When we do that, we'll be heading in that direction. It'll take us underneath the woods. It's on the far side of that building. Later on, when we explore the northern canyons, we'll be going back toward the parking lot. That'll be the one that takes us underneath the flagpole and then underneath that tree. The 71 steps beside us will take us down just about 100 feet to the mouth of the caverns. While we're inside, we will be between 100 and 125 feet beneath the surface. It is a beautiful 52 degrees inside the caverns today. I know that because it is always 52 degrees inside the caverns, all day, every day, all year long. One more thing about the steps, young people. The steps are not a race. They're not a race because, take a look at this face, I'm old. I would lose that race. That makes me grumpy. You do not want Grumpy Michael to be your tour guide today. You want Happy Fun Mike to be your tour guide today. So please be careful as we go down the steps, okay? Come on, everybody. Everybody made it down to 71 steps. You know, of course, that comes with news that is not quite as good. They are the same 71 steps. We got to climb back up once we come out of it. I hope you noticed. I hope you noticed. I very craftily did not tell you that till I got you all the way down here.
Oh, Lord.
Now, before we go inside, I do like to talk just briefly about the history of the property. The body of water on the far side of the railing is the Sweatera Creek. It continues to flow that way for 6 more miles and it empties into the Susquehanna River. The Susquehanna River is the largest river in the state of Pennsylvania. It was named after the Susquehannock Indians and inhabited this area. There were several permanent communities of Susquehannocks right along the banks of this creek. The closest one to us was actually directly across from us, just beyond the trees. We know that they were there because of the artifacts that were found on that property. Similar artifacts were found all over central Pennsylvania. The one place those artifacts were not found, inside those caverns. Now it could be that the thousands of explorers that came before us, they may have picked the artifacts up, took them home as souvenirs. It might be that when they installed the gravel floors in the 1920s, they may have just buried those artifacts. It might even be there were never any artifacts in here to begin with, because we don't know. We have no idea to what extent, if any, the Susquehannock might have used the caverns. I have no doubt they knew it was here, though. I want you to look at the mouth of the caverns for a brief moment. Use your imagination now. Erase that block wall so that you just look at the natural hole in the cliff face. Connect the right side to the left side with a big arch that goes a little more than halfway to the top. It's huge. It's a great big gaping hole. It's hard to imagine somebody passing by here in a canoe would have missed that. It's harder for me to imagine the guy standing on the far bank missed it. What's impossible for me to imagine? The hunting party walking right through here missed it entirely. I don't think so. Clearly they knew it was here. We even have credible evidence that it was the Susquehannock that first pointed it out to European settlers sometime between 1620 and 1670. Now, up until 1927, this property was a working farm. The deed for that farm was issued to Hugh Hayes by William Penn himself. In 1927, though, something happened to change the property forever. It was purchased by a gentleman named Bieber. Now, Mr. Bieber, he had a grand scheme. He wasn't going to farm. No, he was going to sell tickets. He was going to sell tickets. He was going to take people down underneath the ground. He was going to show them rocks. Really cool rocks, to be sure, but rocks just the same. He realized when he bought the property was going to require some work. First, he was going to sell tickets to what at the time was a great big gaping hole in the cliff face. He wanted to make money doing this. He knew he had to make sure only the people who actually bought their tickets went inside, so he put a wooden entryway up there with some gates on it. He went inside. He saw that the floor was covered with pits and holes and cracks. It's not going to be safe or comfortable for his guests, so he took gravel like we're standing on, and he leveled a new floor throughout the entire complex. The most important thing our Mr. Bieber did for us, he installed artificial lighting. Now, not only can you watch where you're going, he was a smart enough man to realize if you shine the bright lights on the really cool stuff, it draws everybody's attention right to that cool stuff. He was a smart man, Mr. Bieber. He was, in fact, a civil engineer. What Mr. Bieber was not? Sadly, Mr. Bieber was just not a lucky man. His first tours went through his gates May 16th of 1929. A few brief months before the stock market crash started the Great Depression. Not the best time to start your new business, and unfortunately before the end of the 30s, the business had failed, forcing him to return the property to the bank. A local family bought the property in 1942. The same local family 3 generations later still operates the venture. They're the ones that brought us those beautiful 71 steps. I hope that you noticed on the way down they are nice and level. They are uniform in size. I cannot say either of those two things for the stairs built inside by Mr. Bieber. In 1956, they added the beautiful limestone block entry with the big letters IEC over the doors. These are for Indian Echo Caverns, of course. It was Mr. Bieber that thus named the property. Prior to Mr. Bieber, people called it grottos. People referred to it as Echo Caverns. Most of the time, they just called it the Hummelstown Cave because Hummelstown is a short mile to the north. Does anybody have any questions before we go inside? Okay, we're going to go through the gate on the right-hand side. As we go through that gate, I'll collect your tickets. I'll ask you to wait for me in the big room at the bottom of the steps for a brief moment so I can call the surface to tell them we're going in. They like to keep track of us. I'll call them again when we come back out. If we're down here more than a week, they don't hear from us, they'll get worried. They'll send the peacocks down to find us. All right, come on along, everybody. Smart, creative people working here. They spent a lot of time coming up with really grand-sounding names for every room in the caverns. That's why I welcome you to the entrance. While we're here, I'd like to take just a brief moment. I'd like to point out the colors that are not natural to the caverns, the things that do not belong here. First color I want to show you is the one behind you. The green that you're seeing there on the wall is plant life. This is algae. There are also mosses and ferns that currently grow in the caverns. Plants require 2 things to grow, right? They need moisture. We're 100 feet beneath the ground. We got lots and lots of moisture. They also need light. Before Mr. Beaver, the only light coming in here was the sunlight coming through the hole in the cliff face. The caverns were way too dark for those plants to grow. When Mr. Beaver came along then, he installed artificial lighting, and by doing so, inadvertently opened up a lot of new places for plant growth. When you see green in our caverns this morning, it actually will be growing directly around the light bulb or where the light bulb shines. Now, the second color that doesn't belong here is down here behind the fireplace on the wall. The black you see on that wall back there is soot. Soot is caused by open flames. Early explorers down here in the caverns might have had a little fire for some warmth. They would have explored the passageways with flame torches or flame lanterns. Wherever the smoke touched the walls or ceilings, it left carbon. That's the soot we see. Third thing that doesn't belong here is, of course, the graffiti. If you look over there on the other wall again, right there you can see this guy, E. Smith. He thought it was so important that each and every one of you knew he had been here. He wrote his name right there on the wall. Now, as you look around the entrance room, you'll find a number of places where other people did exactly the same thing. We have a favorite one here. Our favorite one is back here on the overhead. Big red letters back here, it reads, "In Lebanon by Roush's Pretzels." Now, I'm sure that the guy who wrote that up there thought he was doing his buddy a really big favor. Unfortunately, Roush's Pretzels, well, they've been out of business now for over 125 years, teaching us a valuable lesson about advertising. Does anybody have any questions? I'm going to lead you down one short pathway now. It's going to take us to the Indian ballroom we've already mentioned. When we get to that Indian ballroom, we'll talk about how the caverns were created. We'll also talk about the various rock formations we'll encounter during our adventure, all right? So if you come with me, we'll start making our way that way. I do want to take a moment to remind you about your head, because as you get to the front, the ceiling is already sloped toward the floor. Careful with your heads, everybody.
Don't touch.
Everybody come in close. I have a huge booming voice. I will be heard all over the cabin. But if I use that voice, Jack's voice, they're not going to hear him. So you guys come close. You can talk like we're normal people. You guys will still get to hear me. His guests will get to hear him. Everybody will leave happy. So this room is the Indian ballroom. It is the largest chamber of our cavern. From floor to ceiling, behind me, it's called a floor. It is 49 feet tall. At its widest point from wall to wall is approximately 110 feet wide. The brown house that I pointed out to you while we were at the top of the steps is directly above the ceiling right in here. It is separated from the caverns by roughly 45 feet of limestone. Do not envision me coming down here to join us this morning. Our cavern system started a very long time ago. The limestone that makes up the walls of our cavern is roughly 1/8 the age of the earth itself. At some point, that limestone got crushed up above the ancient sea that once covered Pennsylvania. Acid and rain started to etch little holes in that limestone. As the holes grew into little cracks, tiny little trickles of water started to run through those cracks. As those cracks expanded, so did the trickles of water. Eventually, we have two underground streams working down here. One of them is coming out of the eastern canyons here beside me. A second stream is coming out of the northern canyons back here behind me. When they meet here in the middle, they begin to spiral around each other, forming a whirlpool. It's an easiest way to make a whirlpool. With your fingers, your legs, with waves, how you gonna make the waves? Alright, how about this? That's a whirlpool, right? The water's spinning around, right? Yeah, easiest way to make a whirlpool. Flush the toilet. Everybody gets to do this at home. Alright, so that water's spinning around just like that in here in the caverns, and while it's doing that, there's stuff in that water. Particles and stuff that are gouging limestone off the walls and the ceilings and the floors. The faster that water's spinning around in here, the more material it can take off the limestone. The more the material takes off the limestone, the faster that water can spin around in here. The faster that water spins around in here, the more material it can take off. Did I say that already? The cycle repeats itself over and over and over again while the ancient flowing water slowly, ever so slowly, hollow out this room and all the side passages. But then something changes, something interrupts the flow of that water. Either the source of the streams dries up or maybe they just change their course so they don't come through the caverns anymore. Either way, no new water's coming in to push the old water out of the way. It sits here and it waits. While it's waiting, it slowly starts to seep into the ground. It's becoming part of the groundwater. Now this goes on for thousands and thousands of years, while the water level here in the cavern slowly drops down to the floors. The water table today is between 10 and 12 feet beneath the floor we're standing on. Later on, though, when we go into the northern canyons, we actually will be going deeper underneath the ground, walking much closer to that water table. It will be much wetter over there than it is here. Just a little heads up for you for later. That's pretty much the end of the role that was played by the ancient flowing waters, but just the beginning of the role that continues today being played by modern dripping waters. You see, when it rains up on the surface, that rainwater works its way through the soil and attacks it on limestone and drips here in the caverns. As it's doing that, it's bringing minerals down here like calcium carbonate. Calcium carbonate sticks to the ceilings and the floors and the walls, creating the rock formations we encounter down here. Rock formations like stalactites. There's a letter C in the middle of the word stalactite. You know why? Because they grow down from the ceiling. Exactly. All right, so look up the ceiling here. All of these things that look like little icicles, baby stalactites. Something cool about these things, when they're young like this, they are hollow, just like soda straws. So the water is actually coming down the inside of the tube. It's leaving its minerals as it drips out of the end, so that they get a little bit longer every time water gets out of there. Now, as they grow, though, they're going to plug up. It's like folding that straw. The water can't get to it anymore. It has to go around. So it comes out of the outside of the tube. Now it's leaving minerals on the sides and on the tips, but getting a little wider as they get longer. They grow incredibly slowly, agonizingly slowly. They grow at a rate of just about 1 cubic inch. Just about the size of an ice cream, right? They do that much in 100 or 150 years. And that means the largest one in that group there, well, that's only about 500 years old. The largest stalactite here in our caverns today is the Iroquois over here against the wall. Now I can see, yeah, it kind of looks like an Iroquois. I personally think it looks more like a cactus. Some of you might see a pickle, others might see large citizens there. Some of you might even see an alligator tail. The person who signs my paycheck, yeah, she assures me that indeed is an Iroquois. So ladies and gentlemen, the Iroquois. We also want to talk about stalagmites. There's a letter G in the middle of this one because these grow up from the ground. Exactly, very good. So the water's dripping down to the floor, it's hitting the floor and leaving minerals there. That's what you see behind you. All this incredibly white marking rocks, baby stalagmites. As they get a little bigger, you might trip on one like this one here. So careful where you walk. A little older still, they become really irregular in shape like those. The largest stalagmite in our caverns today is the Cape Garden right there on top of the hill. Sometimes, not always, but sometimes you have a stalactite like the Iroquois. It grows directly above a stalagmite like the Cape Garden. Over time, they grow together. The new formation connects the floor to the ceiling, and we call it now a column. The largest column in our caverns today is the Tower of Babel up there on the shelf. I have a little secret that I have told my washing. I appreciate your discussion. I think of my belly. I look up there, I do not see Tower of Babel, I see Tower of Pancakes. Can you guys see the butter and the syrup, right? Yeah. All right, good. All right, there is a fourth formation we'll encounter, it's called flowstone. This one's a little different. So far, everything else, it's formed because water drips 1 or 2 drops at a time. Flowstone forms because sheets of water flow across the surface, like down the wall or across the floor. That's what we got over here. It's a nice wide sheet of flowstone. Notice the places where it looks like frozen waterfalls. Those are the places where it's the most fun to use your imaginations. It's just like when you go outside, you look up at the clouds, you can see all kinds of really cool stuff in flowstone, just like that. We're going to go now and explore the eastern canyons. As we go into those eastern canyons, we're going underneath the wooded area that was on the far side of that brown house. Does anybody have any questions before we go in? Yes? Very tall ladders with padded ends and gloves. And a little bit of luck. I'm going to alter the lighting out here, and then I'll turn some lights over to the eastern canyons. Okay? And I also want you to notice there is water dripping around us. I give you the blue room. It makes perfect sense if you look around in here. Look at the walls and the ceilings here. They're all made of blue limestone. It's the very same blue limestone that makes up the entirety of our cavern complex. The same limestone that in fact makes up the entirety of almost every cavern complex in the state of Pennsylvania. We have limestone in Pennsylvania and we have shale. Shale is very brittle. It will not form caverns. So if you've been in a cavern in Pennsylvania before, it almost certainly was a limestone cavern. There's a story that goes with this room. You guys like stories? All right, our story involves a mummy and a giant. They used to live right here in the blue room, and they were happy here, and they were very comfortable here, except for one tiny little thing. You see, they had trouble getting to sleep at night. It's not the temperature. 52 degrees is very comfortable, right? But it's also damp in this room. If you've ever been camping in the rain, you know that sleep and damp do not usually go hand in hand. But our giant and our mummy, they were smart. You see, they had a plan to help them overcome this little problem. They used to take turns reading bedtime stories to each other from their books of fables. And they would do this while they were sitting in their favorite places. The mummy, she liked to make herself comfortable up here on the wall. And you could see where her head would rest, and her body, and her feet. Now the giant, he was way too big to get up there. He sat right here in the middle of the floor. One night, the mummy's reading to the giant. All of a sudden, you hear this mighty roar! It was so loud, it was so sudden, it scared them both. It scared them so badly, the mummy threw her books up in the air, dropped down to the floor, and ran out of this room as fast as she could. Legend has it that those books continued to fall in this room for an entire week. One of those books can still be seen up there where it landed on the shelf. Now, our giant is every bit as frightened as our mummy. He gets up to his feet and he starts to run after her, forgetting for just a moment just exactly how tall he is, and that's why he hit his head right there on the underside of that natural bridge. You can see the big dent he got there. Before we came down here, one of the things I told you about our caverns was the rocks are extremely hard. Even for the giant, the rocks are hard. He's dazed, he's confused, he can barely see at this point. Staggers backwards, topples over, and starts to kick his feet. He kicks one foot so hard. Well, he kicks one foot so hard, he leaves a size 600 shoe imprint right there in the ceiling. Now, in just a moment, his eyesight does begin to return. He gets back up to his feet. This time, he does remember to duck, runs out of here, and catches up to the mummy. When he does, he picks her up, places her on his shoulder. They run through the creek, disappear into the woods beyond. Neither one of them ever returns to the caverns. What could possibly have scared a giant? I mean, we're talking about a giant and a mummy, right? What could have scared them enough to make them run out of here that quickly? As it turns out, it was only Charlie. Now, in fairness, Charlie is a cave dragon. And if you look back there above your head, you can see his long open mouth with all his sharp pointed teeth. That long forked tongue out flicking out there and tasting the air. Above his arched cheekbone there, you can see his open eye and his curled up ears. If you follow his neck across the top of that natural bridge, it'll take you to the underside of his open wing. And underneath there, you can see the sharp claws of his feet. Does anybody have any questions about the blue room? There is one more thing I like to point out about the blue room. More than any other room in the caverns, this is the room that looks the most like what the ancient caverns would have looked like. After that, water subsided beneath the floors. Before the growth of flowstone, stalactites, and stalagmites, the entire cavern complex would have looked very much like this side of our blue room. Now, there is another room here in the Eastern Canyons I want to take you into. The next room, it's only about a third the size of this one. So we're going to have to get a little closer together. Remember, we are all friends here. Inside that room, there's an experience I want to share with you, an experience that some of you may never have had before. Real darkness. So if you'll come with me, we'll go check that out. I do want to point out to you Headache Rock before we go in. I am sure you can figure out how it got that name. Keep that in mind as you come past it. Come on along, everybody. Come on in, everybody. Get close together. Just please be careful. You don't trip on the big pieces. Come on in. Get close together. Come on in. Get close together. We're one great big family in here, and I promise you, nobody's going to bite you unless you ask them to really nicely. Come this way just a little further. Fill in the center a little bit so everybody can fit in. Thank you. In this country today, most of us live in towns and cities. When you live in a town or a city, it really doesn't matter what time you go to bed at night. The lights are always on. You got street lights and traffic lights, the lights on the cars, the lights on the buildings, the lights on the billboards. It's hard to find darkness. I want to share darkness with you now, so in just a moment, I'm going to turn off the lights. When I do, I want you to remember, it won't matter if we stand in that darkness for a brief moment or 4.5 hours. Your eyes will not adjust because there won't be light in here for them to catch. Now, for this to work, I do need to ask a favor. If you have a device that lights up, your watch, your camera, your phone, just tuck that in your pocket for a moment. All right, is everybody ready?
Yes.
All right, then, in 3, 2, 1. Again, in 1942, there had been a cave-in here. When the cave-in occurred, it left a new opening to the outside world, up there under the ceiling. A new entrance to the caverns. It was through that entrance that the new owner's young son used to sneak in here and scare the guests while they were on their cavern tours. It was also through there that teenagers from Hummelstown would come in to explore. When their explorations turned to vandalism, however, it became necessary to keep them out. And that's why the owners took big pieces of rock and they used them to plug up that hole. Before they did that, if you climbed up this pile of rock and debris that you see here in front of us and going out through the hole up there, you found yourself at the bottom of a 25-foot sinkhole you had to climb your way out of before you could walk back to Hummelstown. The rock and debris that's here in front of us is what filled the sinkhole before the cave-in. That's where it all came from. Are there any questions about the dead end room? Then I have a question for you. What do you do when you get to a dead end? That's right, we're going to turn around, we'll go back through the blue room and back out into that Indian ballroom. Remember I said, with Flowstone, if you use your imagination, you can see all kinds of cool stuff. I'm going to invite you to use your imaginations down here and tell me what you see up here on the wall. I'm going to shine my flashlight on some of the features. I just want you to tell me what you see, okay? You ready? How about we start here? What do they look like to you?
Jellyfish.
Jellyfish, mushrooms, trees, maybe? How about broccoli? Anybody see broccoli? I had a very health-conscious young lady once tell me broccoli. Now, she's probably about your size. Take a look at me. I am hardly health-conscious, right? Broccoli was a huge surprise. It was the green stuff on my dinner plate. Can you imagine my shock? Broccoli down here in the cabin. Once I turned around afterwards, I could see that though. How about, okay, the next one. While the flashlight's shining on it, with the lights up there, you're probably not going to see anything. Once I turn the light back off, keep watching in the same spot. That's usually when something appears to you. So we're going to look right there. I want you to keep watching there, even when I turn the light off. What's it look like now? An eagle. A snake, a dragon. Dinosaur. Did you ever see Jurassic Park? Yeah, that's one of my favorite movies. That looks like a Tyrannosaurus Rex to me. Yes? All right. How about over here? What's that look like? An angel? A waterfall? That's good. Does anybody see a lady in a sparkly white dress? I hear that a lot. A lady, yeah, dancer, a bride, a fairy, or a princess. I spent more than 20 years working on a whale watch boat before I came back to Pennsylvania, so the first thing I noticed about her was her tail down there. Now, doesn't that make her a mermaid? You want to know a little secret about my mermaid? My mermaid has a really full beard. We're going to go next. We're going to go and explore the northern canyons. A couple of things about the northern canyons before we go in. First, we're going deeper underneath the ground. It's going to be wetter down there. Watch around the light bulbs for signs of plant growth. Also, we're heading back toward the parking lot, so we're heading toward the flagpole and then the tree beyond. The most important thing for me to tell you about the northern canyons is about the red lights. The red lights do not mean stop, the red lights mean duck. These are the places where the ceilings are the lowest. Please be very careful with your heads in the northern canyons, okay? All right, careful on the slope going in, everybody. The first red light is 10 feet inside. So again, careful with your heads. Duck down if you can.
Ay, que se lo mojan, sí, se lo mojan. Oh, güey, ¿por qué no se lo vaya? Se suelta. No se los va a meter en los tenis. Ya, en la otra parada. Ajá. El tipo está mojado, pero es horrible.
As you come into this room, please move over to your left-hand side. There is a door that's going to come out. They're going to go right past us. If we go to our left, they can walk right past us. Just want to make sure everybody's in the room and out of the passageway. For letter H, as you come into the room, please move to the left-hand side of the room so that the door coming out can go right past us. Thank you very much. All right. Thank you. Thank you very much. We'll go right ahead. Thank you. Rainbow room. We call it the rainbow room because here you can see all of the colors that are natural to the caverns. Look up at the ceiling. That's the blue of the limestone. On the wall over there, the sparkly white you see down here, that is the calcium carbonate of flowstone. A little further this way on that wall is iron oxide or rust. That's the red you see. And the brown streams down the wall here is clay. Go right ahead. Go right ahead. This room has a story that goes with it as well. This story is a true story. It's a story of adventure. In 1919, several teenage boys from Hummelstown found their way into the caverns and spent a day exploring the passageways and crawl spaces. At some point during that day, they made their way into this room. Now, when they did that, the passageway we just walked through, that wasn't open to them yet. Mr. Bieber had to use tools and dynamite to expand that and open it up so we could walk through there. These boys came back here through a series of crawl spaces. They got to those crawl spaces by climbing up the wall in the Indian ballroom. The crawl spaces brought them out way up there. Way up there. Now, they wanted to explore this room, so they tied a rope around the rock up there, started lowering themselves down to the floor. As they did this, they noticed something on this little ledge. On that little ledge back here above your heads, there was a small wooden box. It's about 4 inches by 4 inches by 4 inches. Inside the wooden box, they found a handful of gemstones, a little bit of costume jewelry, small glass vial with a liquid in it, and a handful of coins. 17 coins. Some of these are extremely old. The oldest coin, in fact, is so old, it doesn't even have a date stamped on it. It's from the Roman Empire. Features the face of Emperor Constantine. The oldest coin with the date on it is a Moroccan coin from the year 1288. The most recent coin, a Turkish coin, minted in 1915. That's important. That's everybody coming out. Thank you very much, everybody. That's important. That coin was made in 1915. The box was found in 1919, and that means whoever left that box up there had to do so during that 3 or 4 year period. Now the boys pick the box up, they put it in their pack, continue exploring. At the end of the day, they take it home to Hummelstown with them. When their parents find them with that box, they get in a huge amount of trouble because they took something that didn't belong to them. Their parents made them put up flyers that they posted all over Hummelstown and the surrounding area, trying to get the owner of the box to come and pick it up. Now, over the years, a number of people did stop to try and claim that box, none of whom, though, could describe the box or its contents. Clearly, none of them were the real owner. The actual owner of the box never showed up. Now, by the 60s, our boys had grown up. They'd grown old. Most of them had passed away. The last guy left is a guy named Russell. All these years later, Russell still has that box. He also realizes he's just not a young man anymore. His days are numbered. So he brings the box back to Indian Echo Caverns, meets with the owner here, and tells him the story in great detail of how he and his buddies, how they explored their way in here that day, found that box. He said, though, well, the next thing he said was kind of a surprise to us. He said he wanted to give it back to us. Well, the owner agreed, right? He agreed to the one condition. And one condition was that when we brought guests into the Rainbow Room, we would tell them the story of Russell's adventure with his friends that day. Russell said that turned out to be the best day of his young life. So like I said, the owner agreed. I'm sure they shook hands before the two gentlemen parted company. True to his words, I did just tell you the story briefly. More importantly, true to those words, the mystery box, that's what we call it now, the mystery box, remains up in the gift shop. As you go through the double doors, immediately on the left-hand side, there's a glass case that's just about eye level. Inside that glass case, you'll find the original box itself and all its original contents. Especially if you're into old coins, it's a really cool thing to check out. All right, does anybody have any questions about the Rainbow Room? One more thing I want to point out to you before we move on, the big hole under the wall. This big hole is what happens when you bring a geologist into a cavern. Any place where he finds soil, any place where he finds clay, he pulls out a shovel and he starts to dig. He's got to know where it goes or what's underneath it. I don't really know how he got in there, but once he was done shoveling the soil out and there was no more clay left in there, all that was left was a big hole in the limestone. Cool thing about this is, though, it goes down deep enough that when it rains outside and the water table starts to rise, it fills up with water. As it starts to dry up out there, the water table subsides back down, water leaves there. It does not have water in it most of the year, so we do not think of it as one of our natural underground lakes. There are 3 of them, however. 2 of them are further up this pathway. We'll get to them in just a few moments. When we do get to those lakes, I ask you politely but insistently again, please do not throw anything into the lakes. Stuff that gets thrown in the lakes or dropped in as it begins to degrade, releases its chemicals into the water, changing the water chemistry. That pretty much poisons the lake. So that's why we ask you politely, please, don't throw anything into the lakes. As we continue this way, again, please be careful with your heads. In about 10 feet, we're going to pass underneath that flagpole. So we're kind of around where the goat pens are right now. We'll be making our way toward the tree in the center of the parking lot there. All right, careful with your heads, everybody. Come on along. I really want you to notice how beautiful clear that water is. The reason the water is clear is because of the way the lakes fill. They all fill the same way. There's no spring, there's no stream. Our lakes fill because water drips into them from the ceiling. That rainwater we talked about before, coming through the soil and then through the cracks in the limestone, the soil is actually removing the impurities from that water so that by the time it gets into the lakes, it's almost pure water. And then as you continue this way, I want you to notice how rough the rock walls become. Most of the passageways we've been through so far have had fairly smooth walls because for the most part, they were created by erosion, by water. These walls are rough like this because they were created entirely by Mr. Beaver. He wanted us to go around Crystal Lake and not through it. In order to make that happen, he had to create a tunnel for us. He used dynamite and jackhammers to do it. To get the hoses down here for those jackhammers, he drilled a hole from the surface. Took his best guess to where to drop that hole. As it turns out, he dropped it right above the lake itself. Probably the best place he could possibly have put it. Once his excavation was complete, of course, he filled the hole back in. But if you were to stand on top of that hole today, middle of the parking lot, reach out your arm like this, you'd be touching that tree that I pointed out to you before we came down here. We are right now underneath that tree in the center of the parking lot. As we continue this way, we're going to be making our way toward the far side of the parking lot where the restrooms are. Down here, we're working our way toward the room that was so enchanting to Mr. Beaver that he used the dynamite and jackhammers to create this passage. This lake is 6 feet deep. And then as you come across the bridge, I want you to look underneath the bridge. That is where you will find our second lake. This is Wedding Lake. Once again, underneath the bridge, you will encounter Wedding Lake. This is the deepest of our natural lakes. It is 8 feet deep at its deepest point. You'll notice the water is every bit as clear and beautiful as the water in Crystal Lake, again, because of the way the lakes fill. If that lake is Wedding Lake, that must make this room the wedding chapel. Indeed it does. We call it the wedding chapel because 4 or 5 times every year, people do get married inside the caverns. Smaller parties actually get married right here on the bridge. Larger parties will get married in the larger Indian ballroom or the Wilson room we haven't seen yet. I'm going to ask you to come this way just a little bit further, try and get everybody into the room at once. I don't know about you guys. I get invited to a wedding. My first thought is not, who am I going to take? My first thought is not, what am I going to wear? My first thought is, what flavor is that cake going to be? Our wedding cake down here is 16 layers of very fancy frosting that goes almost the whole way up to the ceiling. A cake that big, that is going to require a very large knife like the one that hangs here above my head. Our venue here, our wedding venue is complete. It's ready to go. You've got everything you need here. You want music at your ceremony? I got a pipe organ back there in the corner. Something happens and the bride's down on the way. I've got a spare hanging there on the wall. It's a beautiful, sparkly white number with green trim. All right. Does anybody have any questions about the wedding chapel? All right. We've come to another dead end. Hanging from the ceiling. Stalagmites go up to the ground. There are a couple of columns that connect the two. The back wall is covered entirely with glowstone among those formations. This is called Mirror Lake. Mirror Lake is the shallowest of our natural lakes. At its deepest point, it is a whopping 6 inches deep. The shallow water, though, has a very reflective surface. It's so reflective that if you look on the white glowstone beyond that lake, the shadows dancing back and forth across that glowstone are the reflection of the river coming across the surface of that water. We are going to continue on now. We're going to go down the stairs to the far side. We're going to meet in the middle of the big room at the bottom of the steps. I'm going to ask you to go in front of me so I can turn the lights off behind us. I hope you've noticed I've been turning lights on when we go into rooms and offices we meet them. It is not about controlling the growth of the electric bills. It is about controlling the growth of the algae and mosses that do not belong here. So again, be careful on the steps, please, as you go down. It is okay to use the railing, and we'll meet again in the middle of the big room at the bottom. Had been accused of and convicted of a horrible, horrible crime. A crime that was so horrible that she herself refused to speak of what had happened. Not just to her family, not just to her friends, not just to her lawyer. She wouldn't even talk to the judge during her trial. It was because she refused to speak on her own behalf that she did get convicted. Her conviction brought with it a permanent sentence. Due to the youth of some of our guests, I will creatively edit some of the details here and make this as family-friendly version as I possibly can. Please step down on the bed. Thank you. Now, Mr. Wilson, he received word of this. He knew there was no way his sister could possibly have done something this vile. So he left his home in Lancaster County. He traveled to Chester County where she was being held because he hoped. He hoped he would be able to get her to tell him what had actually taken place. Luck would have it, she did tell him the story. She told him right away. More importantly, she told him in front of somebody else, so he was able to take the statement from that witness back to the trial judge. He got that judge to issue a temporary stay of her sentence that allowed him the better part of 1 month, just 1 month, to go look for evidence that might overturn her conviction. During that month, he became quite ill. So ill that his doctors confined him to his bed. Still, he was able to gather enough information that he was directed to a man in Philadelphia named Charles Biddle. Charles Biddle was the vice president of the state council at the time. He wrote a letter to the sheriffs who were supposed to carry out Elizabeth's sentence, instructing them not to do so until they heard back from him. Now the trouble was, it's still 1786, was long before the telephone. You can't just dial up there and say, yo guys, don't do it. Mr. Wilson had to physically take that letter from Philadelphia to Chester County, place it into the hands of the sheriffs. But there had been a lot of rain. There had been so much rain, in fact, that the swollen Schuylkill River had knocked over its bridge. Because of the swirling, fast-moving waters, the ferry wasn't running. Mr. Wilson lost several days waiting for that ferry. When he decided he could wait no longer, he got back on his horse and he tried to swim that horse across that river and drown that horse in the process. It was because of delays like this that he did arrive back in Chester County between 3 minutes and 20 minutes too late to save his sister. Her permanent sentence did get carried out. As you can imagine, he was heartbroken. He was devastated as he stood there in the crowd watching them take her body down from the gallows. While he stood there, somebody in that crowd handed him a letter that she had written to him just moments before they took her up there. In that letter, she expressed to him that by the grace of God, she had found strength. She had found the courage to overcome what she was going to need to endure. She urged him. No, she begged him. She said, pray. Seek for your own peace in the matter. In order to do this, he becomes a hermit. Spends the better part of the next 15 years wandering around Lancaster County, working his way in this general direction. And then in 1802, he finds his way here into the caverns. Now, when he first came in here, the gravel floor we're standing on, that wasn't here yet. Mr. Beaver installed that in the 1920s. So flowstone, like over there, where it's come the whole way across the floor. You remember, flowstone is formed because water is flowing across the surface and leaving its minerals behind. That makes a very wet place to try to sleep. So our Mr. Wilson took his bedroll, he put it up there on top of that rock ledge. He would climb up and down using a rope ladder he had secured to the base of this stalagmite. You can still see the rope arms on today. He would pull the rope ladder up with him every night. That was for protection. In 1802, there were no gates on the cavern entrance, so anything could wander in here. Things like bears or bobcats or other people. So to protect himself, he pulled his rope ladder up. While he lived in this room, he worked with the farmer across the creek. He was doing odd jobs for the guy. The farmer paid him with food and clothing and other things he might need. The farmer found Mr. Wilson to be a very dependable sort, so in 1821, when Mr. Wilson failed to show up for work, that farmer got worried and came looking for him. He came into the caverns and found that our Mr. Wilson had passed away peacefully in his sleep at about the age of 62, we think right here in this room. Tradition has it that the farmer picked up Mr. Wilson's body and carried him outside, buried him on the property and placed a marker on the grave. Nobody has seen that marker in over 100 years now, so at this point, nobody truly knows exactly where Mr. Wilson's buried. But that's not the end of the story. You see, the farmer returned here to remove Mr. Wilson's effects, and he found that Mr. Wilson had been keeping journals. The journals told stories from his childhood when he was growing up in Chester County with his sister Elizabeth. They told the story of what had befallen his sister that drove him to become a hermit. Most of the writings in the journals are the philosophic thoughts he was having during the 19 years that he lived in this room. Because of the condition of those journals, the farmer took them back to his home and painstakingly copied them. In 1839, he published a printed edition of Mr. Wilson's journals, a copy of which can still be found in the State Capitol complex in Harrisburg. Due to the condition of his pages, however, it is extremely difficult to get permission to read that document. Mr. Wilson's words are not kept from us, though. If you Google Pennsylvania Hermit, excerpts from those journals will come up on your screen. Also in the gift shop, there's a small booklet entitled The Life of Amos Wilson. Again, these are excerpts from those journals. Does anybody have any questions about the Wilson room or about any of the other cool stuff that we saw on our tour this morning? Yes. It does. On behalf of Indian Echo Caverns, I would like to thank you for coming to explore with me today. I hope you enjoyed yourselves. Hope you may have learned a thing or two. I would like to remind you, if you're into old coins or just really cool stuff, that mystery box waits for you to come and have a look at it up in the gift shop. It's called the mystery box because even a century later, we still have no idea who left it back in the caverns or why. Next to that in the counter, you'll find the guest book. If you have comments that you would like to make about the tour you were just on, about the cool stuff that we saw, or the stories that we told, or the quality or lack thereof of your tour guide, and again, my name is Michael. Please do not get any of my colleagues in trouble for the things that I said or did. We do read our comments. It is important to all of us here that each of our guests has a pleasant experience here in the caverns. So again, I thank you very much for coming. In just a moment, I'm going to lead you down one last pathway into the exit room. I do not want you to be fooled. It might look just a little bit familiar. If you're the type that notices things, it's going to look incredibly familiar. You see, I get the tiniest little bit of authority. The only thing I'm allowed to do here, I get to change the name of that room from entrance room to exit room. That only lasts, of course, as long as it takes for us to walk through it, going the other way. So again, thank you very much for coming, everybody. One last time, please do be very careful with your heads over here. The ceiling is a lot lower than it looks.